Terry was walking past his parents' room when he heard his mother's frustrated exclamation. "I can't believe I have to work all Easter weekend," she bemoaned, sitting on the bed as she tried to stop her tears. His father was shaving in the bathroom and looked like he was only half listening. Terry thought she had probably gotten off easy, since now Dad was going to have to handle Easter by himself. He would have to color the eggs, make the Rice Krispie bunnies, hide the eggs, sneak out the baskets at night, and generally take care of Terry and his sister. His parents would have likely been a little sad to know that at 10, their son no longer believed in these things. Had, in fact, peeked while his mother set the baskets out last year. But he wasn't breathing a word of it to Laura, so she'd still be excited about the coming of the bunny. "The kids will be sad to not see you Sunday morning," his father commented, wincing as the razor nicked him. One look at Mom told Terry that was the wrong thing to have said. "Thanks, Randy, 'cause I don't feel bad enough as it is. I'm looking at working 16 to 15 hours a day for the next 3 days, and you throw something like that at me." His dad held toilet paper to the cut, but Terry thought the wound he had dealt his mother might be worse. I didn't mean anything by it," he corrected, finishing up with the shaving cream on the left side of his face. "It was just—" "Well, don't worry then," she said, getting up and turning for the door. "I'll just sleep in the guest room after I get done dragging myself in so I won't disturb you. I wouldn't want you to miss any sleep so you're fresh to deal with the kids all weekend." When his dad commented that wasn't fair, he set off a shouting match that lasted for the better part of 30 minutes. Terry had seen his parents fight before. Their arguments were something that were starting to become more frequent as of late, and Terry thought it might be because they never saw each other. His mother worked long hours at her job, and his father worked opposite her, making more money than she could from breaking her back, as she often said. They tried to hide these fights from him and Laura, but both had heard them and knew better than to get involved. So, when his mother slapped his father hard enough to rock his head to the side, it surprised her as much as it did Terry. She stood like a statue for a pregnant moment, the two of them caught in tableau, both too afraid to move lest their marriage just shatter like a soap bubble. I have to go to work," she stuttered, grabbing her coat from the bed as she walked to the door. Terry scuttled away, but he saw her shadow as she stopped in the door like she meant to say something else. She left instead, her slip-safe shoes making a crink noise on the floor as she walked. Terry just stood there, unsure of what to do now, afraid to move, lest she should hear him and turn around. But when the door closed in the living room, he knew she was gone. He still couldn't bring himself to move just yet, not sure what to make of this new development. He had heard them fight, but never liked this before. He peeked back through the door and saw his father, looking at the mark in the mirror. He was trying to be stoic, but to Terry, it looked like he was having trouble figuring out what that slap had meant. Terry trotted down the hall while his dad was distracted, wanting to be in the living room with Laura when he finally came to check on them. She was watching Paw Patrol on the couch, but it didn't really look like she was paying attention. She glanced up when Terry sat next to her, and he could tell that she'd been listening. She was 4, but she already knew well to listen when her parents fought. It was how you could tell if Mom was going to come into the living room to play with you, or if she was going to sit in her room and cry. It was how you could tell if Dad might want to throw the ball around, or if he was likely to growl at you to go play somewhere else. "I'm tired of this," Terry said, turning to look at the TV as he watched the pups save a bunch of ducks. "Me too," Laura said, not even having to ask. "I don't want Mommy and Daddy to leave, but I hate when they fight. Sometimes I wish they would leave," Terry said, and Laura looked at him as she covered her mouth with her hands. "Don't say that, Terry. Who would take care of us?" "I don't know," he growled, feeling her sweaty hand slip into his, "but anyone would be better than them fighting all the time." They sat in silence for a while as the show went off and something else came on. Terry wasn't really paying attention to it anyway. He had learned early in life that when you were watching TV, nothing else really seemed important. You could ignore your parents fighting, your sister crying as your mom cried from the next room, your dad as he tried to talk softly to Grandma on the phone about how bad the last fight had been and how much he wondered how long they could go on. Dad wandered in somewhere between shows and told them that lunch would be in a little while, asked if they had picked up their toys beforehand. Both went about it mechanically, throwing their toys into the box as they tidied up. Terry thought a lot about that fight that day, and it followed him like a ghost as he tried his best to outrun it. He thought about the way that she had accused his dad of not wanting the kids as he put his toys away. He thought about the way Dad had accused Mom of only wanting to work all the time as he ate his PB&J. He thought about the sound of that slap as he tried to concentrate on a video game or a comic book, and they chased him like a dog chases its tail all day long. He was still thinking about it when he went to bed that night, and when Dad turned off the light and told him that he loved him, he found his eyes weren't nearly tired enough to send him off to dreamland. He lay there in the dark, letting it pool around him as the moon sent runners of light in through the window. He was still awake when his mom came home, and he heard her look in on his father before going to the guest room and closing herself off. Terry closed his eyes, trying to seal in the hot tears that threatened to come leaking out. 10 was too young to realize that your comfortable life might be coming to an end. He shouldn't have such thoughts, but he'd watched Bobby Fitzroy go through it the year before. Now Bobby lived with his dad in New Mexico half the year, and his mom down the street the other half. Terry saw him at school still, most of the time, but he looked angry and confused. Bobby looked like he wasn't sure where he was a lot of the time, and he'd started getting into fights more often. Terry didn't want that for him or Laura, and as he tried to stop the tears, he heard himself whisper the words of a prayer or a curse. Take them away. Take them away before they can hurt us. I don't care who's going to take care of us, but I don't want them to share us. Please, 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 don't make me choose between them. I just want the fighting to stop. He drifted off as a light rain began to fall outside, a soft sound beneath it that, to his ears, sounded like hopping. Laura woke him up in the morning, shaking him so violently that he thought someone was attacking him. Terry! Terry, wake up! Mom and Dad are gone! Terry came groggily awake, still half in the dream that had held him all night. He was sitting in bed, watching the light stream under his bedroom door, broken only by something that came thumping up and down the hallway. It seemed to shake the house with each loud thump, and the longer he watched, the more curious he became. He'd gotten out of bed, but each step towards the door seemed to stretch his room like a funhouse. The door was suddenly miles away, and as he moved closer, he watched that thumping creature move back and forth in front of it. Just as he finally reached the door, it stopped in front of it and seemed to stare at him, as much as a shadow could stare. Its long black shade fell across him, and as the door came open, he was blinded by the light on the other side. Just as something began to materialize, Laura had started shaking him, and he'd never seen what it was. What'd you say? He said, rubbing at his eyes, not sure if he had heard her correctly. Mom and Dad are gone. The room is empty, and I can't find them. She was still in her PJs, and her hair was a puffy cloud hanging around her head. She was crying, and Terry could tell that she'd been up for a little bit. He wasn't too worried, though. Mom and Dad sometimes left them alone, but they usually left a note or something to explain. The more awake he came, the more Terry just assumed they had forgotten to get Easter stuff and just went out to pick some up while they were asleep. Maybe, he dared to think, they had gone to talk about what had happened yesterday, too. Did they leave a note? They probably just went out to buy Easter stuff for us. I don't know. I woke up and there was a noise in the living room. I'm really scared, Terry. Someone put decorations up in the hall, and I could see something big moving around in the living room. Come with me to check. I don't want to go alone. Terry sighed and climbed out of bed. Laura got like this sometimes, and until he proved to her that there was no boogeyman waiting to snatch her up, she wouldn't leave him alone. Best thing to do was get up and prove to her that there was nothing to be afraid of, so he could go back to bed until his parents got home. They never went anywhere together. They never seemed to do anything together other than sleep. So if they were both gone, he still held out hope that maybe they were talking things out. When he stepped out into the hallway, however, Terry thought something else might be going on. The walls were covered in Easter decorations. Crepe paper yellow chicks, cotton ball bunnies, yellow suns, multicolored Easter eggs, they were all stuck up to every surface and seemed to glare down at him, even with the hallway lights off. The only light he could see, in fact, was the warm, welcoming glow of the living room. As they watched, something did seem to be moving around in there, and Terry felt cold dread with every step he took. The sound of it moving reminded him of his dream. It was like hearing an adult hop around on all fours, and it was not an altogether comforting sound. As they came into the living room, Terry saw the decorations were in here as well. They made the living room look strange. The furniture looked similar, just like a lot of his friends' living rooms looked similar to his. But the canary yellow walls had been completely covered in decorations. They covered the windows and the door in the technicolored vibrance of a Lisa Frank notebook, and on the TV stand, where the old 30-inch TV sat, were a pair of baskets and a note that looked like someone had written it in crayon across the virgin poster board. "Happy Easter, Laura and Terry. We have a wonderful Easter egg hunt for you. Find 5 Easter eggs and then come to the kitchen for a lovely Easter breakfast," it said. Terry was hesitant. If his parents had planned this, then it was way out of left field. Laura, however, was delighted. Her earlier fears vanished, and she laughed as she grabbed the pink and green basket that was clearly meant for her. Terry reached for his own, and as he looked around, he could see plastic eggs hiding everywhere. Hiding was a bit of a stretch, he supposed. Some were hidden, but others were just tossed about, helter-skelter, as if a much younger child might be seeking them. "Come on, Terry! We only need 5 eggs!" They had their eggs quickly, the living room fairly bursting with them, and as they came to the kitchen, Terry found the source of the glumping noise. Seated at the table, its painted eyes smiling placidly, was someone who could only be his father in a large and intricate rabbit suit. The legs were so comically big that you would have to hop in order to move, and the body was clothed in a vest of many pastel colors. A pair of large buck teeth graced the face, and one ear hung jauntily at a crooked angle. At the stove was someone in a much more normal-sized chicken suit, the dimensions more suited for moving. They were cooking and clucking happily, and Terry could smell pancakes and butter as he and his sister approached the rabbit man. Laura was hesitant, but her smile made Terry think that she was still enchanted by the whole thing. "Congratulations, my little peeps," the rabbit man said, throwing his arms wide in excitement. "You've passed the first test. I hope you're ready for some breakfast." As he said it, a group of smaller chicks came bustling out, holding plates up so their mother could put pancakes on them. They all seemed to balk and cluck like real chickens as they bustled about, and as Terry and his sister sat down, they brought them large pancakes with jelly beans baked into them, a glass of soda and chocolate milk to wash it down with as well. Both the kids set to covering their cakes in syrup and laid in with relish as they scarfed down the tasty treat. As they ate, the chicks left, but the chicken and the rabbit seemed to watch them with interest. Terry found it a little off-putting, but he supposed it was the idea of having someone in a costume that interested in you. He was still pretty sure that this was just his mom and dad putting on for them. Maybe this was some of their cousins that acted as the chicks, and he felt only a little embarrassed by all of it. Terry was a little too old for all this, at least he felt so, but he could appreciate the effort that had gone into it. Maybe this was their way of making up for all the fighting lately. If so, Terry wasn't about to ruin this for Laura, who was probably certain that this was the Easter Bunny and his helpers. "So," said the bunny, bringing his gloved hands together, "are you ready for the next egg hunt?" "Yeah!" Laura said, practically vibrating with all the sugar. "It's very simple," the rabbit man said. "Go collect 10 eggs each and get a wonderful prize." Laura hooted and was off like a shot, but Terry stayed for a moment. "So what's the prize?" he asked. "Are you guys giving us our baskets early or something?" The bunny man cocked his head a little, and the chicken made a low little cluck sound as she folded her hands in front of her. "Why, you've already got your basket, silly. If you want your next surprise, you better go find those eggs before your sister gets them all." Terry rolled his eyes. "Whatever you say, Mr. Easter Bunny," and went off to find some eggs. The second egg hunt took next to no time as well, but Terry discovered something strange when he left the living room to search the few other rooms in the house. Their 2-bedroom, 1-bath was full of plastic eggs. The bathroom, his sister's room, his parents' room, the living room, the coat closet, even his room had some eggs in it. He found 5 in the hallway, 5 more in the bathroom, but it appeared that he had taken his time. His sister was already biting the head off a large chocolate bunny when he came back to the kitchen. The Easter Bunny was looking on with frozen joy, but the chicken was gone. Terry figured his mother had needed to go to work, and it would just be them and the father rabbit for a while. Terry brought his eggs back and was presented with a large chocolate rabbit of his own. He hardly needed the sugar, but he found that he was wrapped up in the spirit of the season now, so he took a bite. After that, the day progressed in much the same way. They ate candy, they hunted eggs, and when lunch rolled around, the chicken and her chicks served them a lunch which turned out to be some kind of hamburger made out of gummy bear material with circus peanut buns. They hunted eggs all afternoon, winning chocolates and stuffed animals and other little trinkets. As they sat on the couch watching the Easter bunnies coming to town, Laura snuggled against her older brother as she tried to stay awake. Terry was trying to concentrate on the TV, but he felt like something was watching him. The prickling hairs on the back of his neck were tingling, and as he glanced around, he saw something large lean back into the kitchen. Their dad hadn't broken character all day, Mom either, and though Terry applauded their efforts, he was ready for some normalcy. Surely they wouldn't keep this up all weekend, would they? His mom would have to go back to work. Dad would have to go back to work. This was fun. It was the first day in a long time that his parents hadn't spent the day fighting, but Terry knew that tomorrow it would probably go back to business as usual. As he drifted off, he felt the shadow of the rabbit fall over him again, and shuddered as he remembered the dream from the night before. He woke up in his bed the next day, Laura shaking him awake again. "Terry! Terry!" "What, Laura? I want to sleep. I'm tired." He rolled over, pulling the covers over him as he slid his head beneath the pillow. He felt something small and plastic press against his cheek, and opened his eyes to find a fluorescent orange egg nestled beneath the pillow. "Okay, but you'll miss the egg hunt for breakfast," she said shyly, running out of the room as he sat up in bed. He could already see a few of the eggs hidden in his room, and a smile stretched his face as he grabbed for his basket. It seemed they were having another day of egg hunts. Their father was waiting for them in the kitchen, Mom in her hen costume cooking at the stove, and when he held his hands out, Laura dumped 5 eggs into the floppy mittens that covered them. "Great job, dear," he said, pulling a giggling Laura into a hug. "Mother hen, Laura would like her breakfast now." The hen bawked loudly and set a plate down in front of Laura with scrambled eggs and bacon. Laura looked a little disappointed before biting into them and finding they were gummy bacon and eggs. The rabbit looked at Terry as he came stumbling into the kitchen, wiping sleep from his eyes and taking in the strange scene. His sister was laughing as she stretched the bacon like taffy, scarfing it down with gusto. Terry started to sit, but the rabbit man opened his hands, flapping them a little as if he expected payment. "Right," Terry said. "How many is it this morning?" "Only 5, the rabbit said cheerily, and Terry put his head back in the living room and quickly snapped up 5 of the plastic eggs. After he handed them to his father, he was rewarded with his own plate of gummy breakfast. "Not to ruin your theme here, Dad, but could I get some real eggs?" He heard the pan crash against the stove and turned to see Mother Hen glowering at him through the eye holes of her mask. Even through those painted-on happy eyes, Terry felt like he could feel the coals of her rage. Was she that committed to the role? "My bad, Mom. I didn't mean to insult you," he said, turning to eat. The Easter Bunny was giving her an equally hollow look, but turned back to Terry with his frozen regard. "Eat up, kids. We have another fun day of egg hunts ahead. We might even dye some eggs and make some crafts. Won't that be fun?" "Yeah!" Laura cried, gobbling up the rest of her breakfast. Terry agreed. leaning in and wondering how long this was going to go. They sat on the couch again that night, watching something called The Easter Chick. They had made masks after breakfast, both of them looking like chick faces made out of Easter grass and papier-mâché. Laura had worn hers all day, looking like a clucking hen as she went about her Easter egg hunting. She punctuated each loud squawk with a giggle, and the Easter bunny seemed to like her enthusiasm. Terry, on the other hand, was glad they would only really be able to do this for one more day. Tomorrow would be Sunday, and Terry expected that after tomorrow, things would go back to normal. The egg hunts were fun, but they had needed 30 eggs to get dinner. Terry had been afraid that they couldn't find 60 eggs between them, but they had managed it after he remembered the one under his pillow and found a few more in his room. They'd been hunting eggs all day, and the longer it went on, the less certain Terry was that his father was in that costume. He had felt the rabbit man watching him on multiple occasions, peeking from doorways and skulking in the shadows, and it just didn't seem like the kind of thing his dad would do. Except for at meals, the chicken woman and her chicks were nowhere to be seen, and Terry wondered where they were going. They had to be disappearing through the back door, because they certainly weren't going out the front. Terry glanced at the window, still covered in decorations, and began to doubt that there was anything there but more wall. There had always been a window there. He knew that, but he was doubtful that there was a window or a door in the living room anymore. The movie went off, and the living room was bathed in the murky credit screen. Terry could feel the rabbit man watching him, the shadows from the kitchen not quite deep enough to hide him completely. He had been watching them for hours, and Terry prayed internally that he was dreaming. This wasn't real. His mind was playing tricks on him. He was being silly. Of course it was his mom and dad. Who else would be doing this? He yawned, but he shook his head. He didn't want to fall asleep. Then he'd wake up in his bed, and things like this would go on forever and ever. No, it'd be over tomorrow. His dad would wake them up Monday morning and ask how they had liked having the Easter bunny over all weekend. He would wear that big old grin he always wore when he asked what Santa had brought them, and Terry would know that it had been him the whole time. As he tried to make his mind believe this, he must have dozed off, because the next thing he knew, it was morning again. Terry woke up the next morning, but not with Laura shaking him awake. He woke up to the sound of Laura's frantic footsteps as she ran around the house. Terry's stomach grumbled, letting him know that it was later than he had thought it was. When he rolled out of bed, his feet came down on a plastic egg, and he saw that there were more of them in the floor. He scooped a few of them up and headed for the kitchen. As he came into the hallway, his sister nearly knocked him over as she hunted for eggs. She was wearing the mask still, her giggling gone as she moved about frantically. She was counting to herself, clearly thinking of eggs, and Terry shook his head as he moved towards the kitchen. The Easter bunny and Mother Hen were still there, and the bunny spread his arms wide as he trumpeted, "Happy Easter!" He was humming Here Comes Peter Cottontail as Terry put the 10 eggs into his arms. The rabbit froze, seeming to count them with his skin, before dropping them onto the floor when some of them broke open to let their jelly beans spill out. "Oh dear, someone didn't read the note. It's 30 eggs for your special Easter breakfast, kiddo." Terry gasped, though it was twinged with cynicism. "Come on, Dad, this has gone a little far. I'm hungry. I want food." The rabbit sat staring at him, his frozen face now seeming more sinister than jolly. "Sorry, kiddo. I'm the Easter bunny, not your dad. If you want your breakfast, it's 30 Easter eggs. It's a good one, too. Don't you want it?" Enough. This was fun at first, but it's becoming too much. I'm too old for this stuff anyway. Laura may like this, but I just want some... But he had reached for the stuffed rabbit head, and the hand that grabbed him was strong and thick and painful. "Oh dear, pal. Looks like somebody wants to be a party pooper. No breakfast for you until you get your 30 eggs. Now scoot, kiddo." The voice never rose, never became mean or monstrous. But when he flung Terry out of the kitchen, Terry realized that the guy in the suit couldn't possibly be his dad. He tossed him effortlessly with one arm, and when Terry hit the wall outside the kitchen door, he saw stars. The rabbit man just sat there after he'd returned his arm to the arm of the chair, his placid face grinning like a specter at the fallen boy. Laura came bustling in then, the front of her Easter dress stuffed with eggs. She upturned her bucket, spilling eggs across the floor, and then dumped the front of her dress and let her bounty cascade into the Easter bunny's lap. There must have been 60 eggs there, maybe more, and as the rabbit clapped his hands together, he reached behind the chair and took out a box that Terry was pretty sure hadn't been there before. Laura reached for it, her hands shaking as she held up the intricately wrapped package, and Terry heard her squeal as she pulled out a pair of onesie pajamas that looked like a chicken's body, minus the head, of course. The shadow of the mother hen fell over him, and when she pushed the door closed, Terry was left hurting as he leaned against the wall. For a split second, Terry thought about looking for some eggs. His stomach was grumbling, and he wanted something to eat, but he knew it would be more sugar and candy. They'd eaten nothing but sweets for 2 days, and Terry's stomach wasn't just grumbling for lack of food. He'd felt ready to throw up after dinner last night. Swedish fish the size of a carp in some kind of sugar sauce, and his body was crying out for real food. Instead of looking for eggs, Terry decided to limp back to his room and see if there was any food there. After a half an hour of looking, he discovered that the beef jerky and the sunflower seeds and even the Christmas popcorn bucket that his grandmother had gotten for him were gone. That seemed to lend more credence to the idea that this wasn't his house. But how could it be anywhere else? Something bounced off his closed door hard enough to rattle it, and Terry had just enough time and energy to throw his body against it before something battered it like a cannonball. It bounced off the frame, Terry pushing continuously as whatever it was tried to get in. He yelled at it to go away, told it to stop, but it just kept pummeling his door until it finally dropped against the wood, panting heavily. Terry wanted to see what it was, wanted to know what was happening out there, but instead he locked the door and shoved his desk against it. A plastic egg fell out from behind the desk, and as it broke open, Terry saw the jelly beans glistening on the floor. He was just so hungry, just hungry enough that even the sugary beans looked tasty as he wolfed them down greedily. He laid eyes on another, and suddenly he could see the fluorescent colors everywhere in his small room. He wanted to gut them and devour every last morsel, but something told him not to. They might have to last him for a little while, he reminded himself, taking them and dumping them on the desk, trying to see what kind of resources he had available. Turned out, the beans lasted for 2 days. No new eggs appeared, and Terry ate the beans sparingly as he tried to devise some plan to get out of here. If the front door was gone, he would only know after he tore down some of the decorations. What would the Easter Bunny and the mother hen do if he started doing that? Would they stop him? Would they hurt him? The bump on the back of his head proved that they would hurt him. But how much? And what was all this? Why was he here? How had he gotten here? Surely this hadn't been because of his stupid Easter wish. He worried about Laura, too. God only knew what was happening to her. He still heard her running up and down the halls as she searched for eggs. Sometimes he wondered if she was the one banging on his door. It happened a few more times, the banging less frantic than the first time, and sometimes he imagined that he heard some weird clucking as whatever it was battered the door. Mother hen, maybe? Terry didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. Whether the food ran out or not, he would need water. On the second day, he devised a plan to get to the bathroom and get back to his room. He would creep out after Laura went to sleep, something she seemed to do after a set amount of time. Whatever was going on out there, his sister still slept. and that would give him an opportunity to get water and maybe some food. He would check to see if the rabbit man slept too, and if he did, maybe he could sneak some food from the kitchen. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. After he heard nothing from the house for what he judged to be about an hour, Terry shoved the desk out of his way and peeked into the hallway. It was dark, the only light coming from the living room, as the TV showed nothing but snow. Whatever tonight's feature presentation had been, it was over now. Terry crept like a ghost from his bedroom and made his way down the hallway. His throat was dry, his belly grumbling, but he made himself be quiet. If the rabbit man or the chicken woman or even Laura caught him, it would be very bad for him. Each step felt like 1,000 miles, and each step made him expect to be devoured by a large and angry beast as his foot came down on the carpet. When his foot struck something, he jumped back in surprise, but when it groaned in pain, he looked down to see that he had stumbled over the last thing he expected to find. It was one of the peeps, but it was lying on the floor, curled into a ball. It was shaking and groaning, and as he came a little closer, it turned its head and said his name. It lifted its wing and tried to touch its face, but it seemed to panic when it touched its throat and didn't find what it expected. It shook its head, saying his name again as it sobbed in pain and fear, and that's when Terry understood. It was Laura. They had turned his sister into one of them somehow. Terry didn't remember crying, but when Laura lifted a wing up to his face, he saw tears on her feathers. He pulled her to him, wanting to comfort her to be sure, but he didn't know how. This was all his fault. He just wanted something better than his parents always fighting and his sister always scared. He just wanted a family that loved each other. When he picked her up, he found her surprisingly light. He took her to the living room, intending to discover if there was a door there or not. He laid her on the couch, Laura seeming to bask in the glow of the TV, as he went to work. The crate paper and construction paper came down in harsh gasps as Terry tore it. The walls were covered in them, thick as spider web, and as they came down, Terry felt almost hopeless, as only the walls greeted him. There was no door, no window, no escape from this place. Terry slammed his small fist against the wall in impotent rage. They had trapped him. The only way out was through the damned rabbit and his clucking wife. And Terry doubted that they could get past them, even if his sister was conscious. Even less so if he had to carry her. Lose something, kiddo? Terry spun in a blind panic, and there was the Easter Bunny. He looked different now, slightly smaller, and when he moved, Terry realized why. His legs moved like they should have, galumphing along like a rabbit's would. He was minus his vest, and his face was far too expressive for a normal creature. He looked like the costume he had worn, but he was just too real to be believed. He was like a prop in a movie. The most genuine thing Terry had ever seen. He held out his hand, and a delicate blue egg appeared. Even at 10, it was the most beautiful thing Terry had ever seen. It was Fabergé, looking painstakingly painted, and in the front was a little window. Inside the window, Terry could see a little house with little trees in the front yard. He didn't need a closer look to see that it was his house and guessed the egg's purpose. I was worried you had died in there, kiddo, and now you're trying to leave before the game's over. Not very sportsmanlike of you. Terry looked at the egg, wanting it more than anything in his entire life, but knowing he'd probably never have it. Let's play a game, then. You find one more egg, and you can go free. Find my special egg in 24 hours, and you can go. Fail, and you come with me. Terry took a step forward, wanting to simply snatch the egg, but as the rabbit closed his fist around it, Terry saw it was gone when he opened it again. "Where's that? Where would you take me?" Terry asked, not trusting the rabbit man for a second.
"Same place I take all the kids who wish for something better. You head home with me, join the peeps, lay the eggs I leave for kids who've earned them, and serve me for all time."
Terry wanted to deny him, wanted to yell some of the unique swears the older kids used at school, but he knew that this might be his only chance. He was screwed either way, so what did it really matter? "Deal," Terry said, and suddenly every light in the house came on, bathing the space in light. The Easter Bunny was gone, but Terry didn't need him anymore. It took him 2 hours to destroy the living room, but he found no egg. He ripped foam out of the couch, moving his sister to a pallet on the floor as he tore it to pieces. He smashed the TV. He tried to pull up the carpet before realizing the futility, and after 2 hours he had nothing to show for it but a torn fingernail and a dull throbbing in his hand. He went room to room, tearing everything to pieces as he looked for the egg. All the normal eggs were gone now, and Terry was glad that they weren't there to muddy the waters. He tore open his parents' mattress. He pulled the drawers out of their dresser. He ripped his sister's stuffed animals open. He tore his clothes from the closet and piled them on the floor. He smashed his fish tank and sifted through the rocks. He pulled everything out of both closets, but after hours of searching, he couldn't find it. He held back his tears with every room that passed, and as he looked into the bathroom, he knew it had to be here. He had left the rooms of the house in ruins, and this was the last place it could be. He tore every towel out of the towel closet, but no egg. He emptied the hamper, but no egg. He took the tank lid off the toilet, and when he found no egg, he broke it on the toilet, leaving it gushing water. Terry looked everywhere, but as it came to pass that there was still no egg, he fell to his knees and cried amidst the seeping water. He had failed. He couldn't find it. Now he and Laura would be trapped in the service of this Easter Bunny, made to lay eggs and serve his food forever. His hands bled, his knees hurt, and as he cried, the tears stung the cuts on his cheek. Terry had wanted to go home. He just wanted this all to end. And when someone enveloped him in a hug, he flinched hard enough to knock himself into the wet floor. He looked up to see Laura standing over him, tears streaming down her eyes as she watched her big brother fall to pieces. "I'm sorry, Laura. I'm sorry I can't save you. This is all my fault. I wished for this. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. But she put a wing against his mouth and shook her head. She reached out with her other, the wing still possessing some stubby fingers amidst the feathers, and held out the egg that he'd been searching for. Terry's jaw fell open. The bunny had hidden it in the one place he knew Terry would never look, with Laura. The knowledge made him feel small, but as he shook the egg, he heard something rattling inside of it. He tilted it so that the picture window was face down, and a large old-fashioned key fell into his palm. He took it back to the living room, looking at the blank wall again until he found what he was looking for, a keyhole in that perfectly flat wall. He put it in and twisted, the door opening onto the mirror of the living room he stood in, minus the utter ruin that Terry had created while on his last egg hunt. He reached back for Laura, but she took a step away and shook her head. "Come on," he said, not understanding. "We don't have to stay." Laura didn't seem capable of real speech, but she took her wings and tapped them on her chest, as if to emphasize that she couldn't go back like this. It doesn't matter. Mom and Dad will love you whatever you look like. Maybe you'll turn back if you come back. Come on, Laura, you've got to come back." Laura shook her strange head, still covered by the papier-mâché mask she had made. Terry wondered what she looked like beneath it, but having seen the peeps as they served them meals, he thought he might be able to guess. As she went back to the kitchen,
He saw the mother hen put a protective arm around her, leading her into whatever lay beyond that room. She only looked back once, and Terry only waited until she was out of sight to step through the door. "I'll come back for you somehow," he whispered, before falling into his own living room and passing out from exhaustion and malnutrition. That was where his parents found him when they came home an hour later. They'd been searching for him for 4 days and had just come from a press conference where they begged the kidnappers to bring their children back. His mother had screamed when she'd found him lying there, and they had rushed him to the ER. He'd been unconscious for about a day, but when Terry came to, he had told them about what had happened. He could tell they didn't believe him, thinking he'd been drugged or was just traumatized, but the search continued for Laura for the next 2 years. Terry told them who had taken her, but no one seemed to think the actual Easter Bunny had kidnapped 2 kids and then just let one of them go. Time went on, and after a dozen or so therapists and psychologists told Terry that his mind had misremembered a tragic childhood event, he started to believe it himself. He tried his best to forget about Mother Hen, the Easter Bunny, and his poor lost sister, but his dreams brought him back to that weekend often. In the dreams, the Easter Bunny chased him through the house, a nightmarish maze of halls and corridors that only ended when the giant rabbit finally came down on top of him, crushing him flat. His wife became fairly used to her husband waking up crying in the night, but she tried her best to help him through it. Despite everyone assuring him that it had never happened, Terry kept the egg on his desk, a reminder of his lost sister. Terry was 32 the next time he thought about Laura. His daughters were opening their Easter baskets as Terry and Mary looked on with smiles. Terry had to bury a shudder as he watched them crack open plastic eggs, and he reminded himself that all that had been his mind trying to make a traumatic experience more palatable. Candace and Skylar were not he and Laura. They would never have to hunt eggs through a nightmare house as they slowly became chickens. That was a fantasy, and one that was over. Skylar looked confused for a moment, holding up a very white egg as she read something printed on it. "Daddy, who's Aunt Laura?" Terry's breath hung in his throat, but Candace cut off any answer that he might have given. "I got one too. I don't think I've ever met her." Terry came slowly towards them, reaching out to Skylar as he asked to see. Printed in black ink on the plastic egg, the insides full of Technicolor jelly beans that spilled out as he gripped it much too hard, was something that brought Terry to his knees. He spent the rest of Easter in the ER, after fainting over with the egg still in his hand, his girls all very worried about him. On the egg were the words, "Happy Easter from your Aunt Laura."
My grandmother has been catatonic for the last 5 years. On the night that Grandpa died, her neighbors called the police to come check on her. They said she was screaming loud enough to be heard 3 houses down, and when the paramedics arrived, she had ruptured something in her throat. Grandpa was dead in the bed they shared, a heart attack, and they zipped Grandpa into that black bag that would take him to the morgue. They carried Grandma out on a stretcher, however. After that, she wouldn't speak, wouldn't move. She just laid in bed and stared at the ceiling of her room in Shady Lane Nursing Home. My grandma, always a strong lady, is fed mechanically. She wears a diaper that an orderly has to change. The physical exercise she gets comes in the form of a physical therapist moving her legs for her as she stays in bed. If she leaves the room, it's because Denise or Reggie, the only 2 orderlies that seem to give a crap about the residents, lift her into her wheelchair and take her outside, or maybe to use the resource center, which is really just a fancy word for the TV room. I begin my story in this way, so you'll know how weird today's events were. I'm a 35-year-old father of 2. I've been married since I was 27 to the love of my life. I thought that after 8 years of marriage and raising kids, nothing could get to me like it did today. I'm sitting at my computer, a bottle of scotch at my elbow, sinking into a fear of returning to my marriage bed. It all started when I went to visit my grandma today. My family has a system. My mom and dad go visit grandma on Monday. I visit on Wednesday. My little sister Lisa goes on Friday. And we all go to visit on Sunday after church. My wife doesn't go every time, but she comes with me sometimes. She's known grandma since we were 17, and she remembers her before her current condition. She wasn't particularly close with my grandparents, but I think she likes to be there for me. My grandma and I have always been close. I love my grandma, and I don't want to waste the time I might have left with her. Whether she knows I'm there or not, it's the thought that counts, and I owe her that much. I went on my lunch break today to see her. Reggie was there when I came in. He gave me a big smile as he finished fussing with her pillows. "It always warms my heart to see you and your sister coming to visit the old girl," he said. He let me know her vitals, told me about the doctor's visit she'd had last week, and then he said he'd leave us to our visit. Just me and Grandma. I took out my lunch and made some one-sided small talk as I ate. I had read somewhere that coma patients are aware that someone is talking to them, and in some cases, it sometimes helps them come out of it. Grandma wasn't really in a coma. No one really knew what was going on with her, but I like to think that maybe one day she'd come out of it and thank me for all the lovely visits. She'd say that it was my voice that had kept her going all those years. I'm pretty sure my sister just played on her phone the whole time she was there, and I'd feel like I'd helped Grandma in some way, while she was going through some troubled times. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. I was just telling Grandma about a client I had helped at work when she suddenly inhaled sharply and exhaled in a rattling, skeletal way. I paused, my hand still holding hers as it always did, and was about to get Reggie. Suddenly the hand tightened spasmodically, and she made another of those rattling breaths, her eyes rolling wildly. She was like a frightened horse looking for an escape, and though it was the middle of the day, I felt a cold chill run through me as she shuddered and gasped in pure terror. "His hands, the hands of the dead," she breathed out. I pushed back suddenly, letting go of her clenching hand. "Grandma, are you? Oh, listen to me. I don't have much time, Bug." She was awake. Her face was pale and thin, her hands little more than fleshy claws, but she was awake. She was looking at me in that way that people look at fire exits in infernos, and as I tried to get up, she reached out again and took my hand in her cold, damp embrace. I wanted to get Reggie. Reggie would know what to do, but the naked want on her face held me in place. I knew I wasn't going anywhere. She'd called me Bug. That had always been her nickname for me, and when she said it, I realized how much I had wanted to hear her say it again. "Please, Bug, I need to tell you what he said. You need to know." She was frantic, almost pleading, and my knees sent me down without thinking. This is what she told me. They had been in bed together when it had happened. They were both at that advanced age where laying together was just that. The two were in bed, sleeping, just being with each other, when Granddad had suddenly woken her up. His arms had been around her, her back against his front. I knew from familiarity that this was how they'd slept since they'd been married since they were 17. The position was natural as sleep itself to them. His shuddering had woken her up. His hands were grasping at me. His fingers were together like a pair of mittens, and he was opening and closing like a slow, painful machine. His mouth was against my ear, and his breath was raspy and panting. He sounded like he'd been running, and as he bucked around, I knew he was having another heart attack. Your granddad's health hadn't been good for a while, but as I tried to break free of his arms, he held me tight and leaned his mouth in close. "No, Ellie, don't go, please. I'm scared. I'm scared." He said it, and God help me, he sounded terrified. "Don't be scared, Roy," I told him. "You'll be okay. I'll call Dr. Stevens, and I can't see, Ellie." That's what he said to me. "I can't see. They say you see the light or hear a voice, but I can't see anything, Ellie. It's all just black. All just black. I can't see his face or hear his voice." He gripped me then, hard, and I felt his nails through my nightshirt as he did it. His heart attack was bad, and I was terrified that he wouldn't come through this time. I tried to break free.
I tried to get loose, but his arms were so rigid that I couldn't get away. The whole time he's just panting and telling me how there's nothing there, and it's all just blackness, and he knows there's nothing there. He kept right on repeating it, even as his voice went on and on, until finally it just went out, and then he leaned in close until his lips were right at my ear, and he breathed out one final time. That was the first time I screamed. I screamed because I was in the arms of a dead man. He was gone, Bug. He'd breathed his last, and that was that, but now I was caught in his last embrace. Her voice took on a tenuous, hysterical sound, and I remember thinking that somewhere a machine must be going off. Somewhere telemetry must be telling someone how her heart was racing along much too fast. Someone somewhere must be on their way with a crash cart or a doctor or a shot to calm her, because in this room she was close to hysterics. I wanted to get that shot. As many times as I'd prayed to God to hear her speak again, I wanted to see that man come through the door with that shot so she could slip off again. As much as I wanted her back, I knew that this was not okay. At that moment, I just wanted her catatonic again. I wanted this jittery, hysterical creature out of pain. I pulled at his hand, those long hands that would take mine sometimes, and they were hard as stone. They locked in death, and now I could not separate them. His weight was a stone around me, and I was afraid, Bug. I was afraid that I'd never get loose, that they'd find us both dead right there, him of a heart attack, and me of just plain old starvation. Her voice broke, and when she closed her hurting green eyes, I saw the tears spilling out of them. I had to break his fingers. They sounded like dry twigs when they crack in the fire, and after I'd broken 4 of them, I almost had his hands apart. That's when he came back. She whispered this as though he might hear her. Her words made my blood run cold. He'd been dead for 5 minutes, Bug. His chest was close enough that I could feel nothing beating. But all of a sudden, his arms tightened around me, and he screamed in my ear like a wolf in a trap. He pulled me hard against him. I felt my ribs trying to break, and all of a sudden, he was bucking and thrashing like the devil himself had a hold on him. It burns, Ellie, he just kept screaming and screaming into my ear. And when I finally thrust his hands apart, I rolled out of bed and got as far as I could. That's where they found me. They found me in the corner. They found me screaming. I don't know what was burning him, but I saw his last few minutes before he went out again. He writhed, he screamed, and he died in agony. What kind of place could make a man scream like that? I thought to myself, I don't ever want to go to that place. What kind of place could it be? What kind of place? What kind of place? What kind of place? She just kept right on, mumbling that phrase again and again and again until I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and ran out as fast as I could. I never looked back. I don't know what I'll do next time I have to see her. I didn't go back to work. I called my boss and told him I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. He let me. He's a good guy. When I called Reggie later that afternoon, he told me that she was right as rain, as usual. When he'd given her her meds that afternoon, she was still lying in bed, staring at the ceiling as always. He never hinted at any change in the telemetry, never said a word about abnormal vitals, just told me how much he knew it meant to her that I came to visit. Now, I'm sitting at my computer and I don't know what to do. I've been sitting here for about an hour, contemplating how I'll get on with the rest of my life, knowing my grandfather's agony and my grandmother's terror at the end of his life. I've been contemplating how I'll climb in bed with my own wife tonight, a problem that seems to be more here and now. You see, the thought of her wrapping her arms around me, placing her chest against my back, it makes me want to shudder right out of my skin. What would I do if she woke up in the throes of a heart attack? What would I do if she whispered those same hopeless words into my ear as she died? What would I do if I found myself trapped in my own dying love's last embrace.
Mr. Faskel has cut my hair since I moved to the city about 3 years ago. He's an older guy, maybe 50s or 60s, and he possesses that look and drawl that make me think he's from up north somewhere. He could be from New York, Maine, or even the Great Lakes area, but I never asked him where. He's not a big guy, maybe $1.20 in the rain, and he cuts my hair just the way I like it. High and tight on the sides, leave me some on top so whoever I'm sleeping with has something to play with, and neaten up my sideburns. I can't grow a real beard, or he'd probably trim that for me too. The best part is, he does it all for free. Hard to believe, I know, but it seems there was a cost after all. Our relationship started easily enough. I had an interview with the city, maintenance and custodial, and I wanted to look sharp for the interview. Everything other than that paid nothing, or barely nothing, and I really wanted to lock this job down. I had a nice set of interview clothes, some comfortable business shoes, and a winning smile. Now all I needed was a sharp haircut to seal the deal. That's where the problem lies. My hair grows abnormally fast. It always has, and when I was a kid, my dad used to bemoan the fact. He made jokes about going to barber school or buying stock in master cuts, but he always understood that when it was time for a cut, it was time for a cut. If you let it go longer than 2 weeks without a cut, it just turned into a shapeless mass. By the end of week 3, I looked like a sheepdog, and Dad would look over his paper and sigh before saying that it was time to take me to the barber. Faskel's Hair and Beards was about a block from my house, and when I stuck my head in to get their prices, Mr. Faskel looked up and smiled at me over a pile of hair he was sweeping up. Then, suddenly, he took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again, I asked if everything was okay. "Just fine, young man. Say, you look like a man in need of a haircut. Am I right?" I told him he sure was, and he invited me in and told me to have a seat. He had about 1,000,000 questions on my first visit. No, I didn't usually let it get this long. I liked it this way, but a little long on the top. No, I didn't use any special shampoo, just the dandruff shampoo from the Dollar General. No, I wasn't really prone to dry scalp, but a fella can never be too careful. On and on and on and on until finally it was done. He had cut it just right, the perfect length, the perfect fade, everything. I asked him what I owed him, and he told me it was free. "Come on," I said, "you gotta charge me something." "I let my customers decide what they can afford, so whatever you can afford is fine with me. Think of it as a tip." I was okay with that, and I walked out with a free haircut, while Mr. Faskel waved me out with a $10 tip. I left with a spring in my step. I felt like a new man, and I was ready for that job interview. I went home, got a shower, and when I looked in the mirror, I knew I had this. The next time I went to see Mr. Faskel, I left him a $20 tip and told him that it was all thanks to him that I'd gotten my awesome new job. For the next couple of years, I always went to Mr. Faskel's when I needed a cut. If I had a date coming up, I went to see Mr. Faskel. Promotion interview at work? Faskel. I told my friends about the shop. I went there just to get touch-ups and talk with the old fella. In no time at all, Mr. Faskel and I were friends. He liked the same sporting team I did, watched a lot of the same movies and TV shows I did, and even liked a lot of the same classic rock that I did. It was great, and I always looked forward to my bi-monthly haircut. Then, about 2 months ago, it all changed. I had come in to get my bi-monthly haircut, telling Mr. Faskel about the previous week as he cut and styled my hair. He was always meticulous, getting everything just right as he cut and trimmed, and when he turned me around to look in the mirror, it was the same way I'd gotten it for the last 3 years. I thanked him, handed him a 20, and told him I'd see him next time. "Of course," Mr. Faskel said, sweeping up the hair. "Come back any time." I was leaving, almost a block up the street, when I realized I didn't have my sunglasses. They were my brand new Oakleys, too, and they'd cost quite a bit of cash. I remembered having them when I came in, taking them off my head, and setting them down at the station that Mr. Faskel used.
No problem, I thought. I'll just go back and get 'em. I stepped in, saying I'd forgotten my sunglasses and was just going to grab them. That's when I saw them. Mr. Faskel was looking up guiltily, his eyes panicked. He was down on all fours, eating the hair he had swept up off the ground, like he was a cow in the field. When he turned, I could see pieces of hair sticking to his lip like accusations. He stood up, wiping himself off and brushing at his mouth as he tried to explain. Now, I know what this looks like, and I'll admit that, yes, I was eating your hair, but you have to understand your hair is what I look forward to. I don't eat just anyone's hair. Well, I used to. Now I can't wait to see you come in so I can eat something good. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, he shouted, getting up as he stalked towards me. He seemed to realize that saying that made him sound crazy, so he switched gears. Haven't I always done good work for you? There's nowhere in this town where you could get a haircut for less than $25. I cut your hair for tips. I've cut your hair for the dollars in your pocket. I've been good to you, and you've been a good customer. Let's just pretend this never happened, okay? Let's just go back to... But I didn't hear the rest. I snatched up my sunglasses and was out the door before he could say another word. I spent a while thinking about that, and the more I processed it, the worse it seemed to get. It began to haunt my dreams, seeing him bent over, eating the hair straight off the floor, looking back at me and grinning with my hair in his teeth. And I'd wake up in a cold sweat. I know it's not a particularly scary dream, but it freaked me the hell out. I don't really like it when people put hair in their mouth. I had a girl in elementary school who used to chew on her pigtails, and it bred in me a lifetime phobia. Just the thought of wet hair in someone's mouth makes me want to puke, and I can't even touch someone's hair without cringing if they have a wig on. I know, it's a weird collection of phobias, but they're mine. It only took a couple of weeks before I started seeing new growth. My hair just grows too fast, and after 3 weeks, my boss commented that I was looking shabby. He handed me a 20 out of his own wallet and told me to go get a trim over lunch. I took it and started looking for somewhere to get a trim. The city had quite a few shops, but it seemed like wherever I went, I caught someone looking at me out of the corner of my eye. It was never anything I could prove, just a feeling, and when I looked up, I could almost swear I'd catch a glimpse of Mr. Faskel. He was gone when I looked up, but it made me extremely paranoid. I became aware of more than a glimpse as the weeks went on. When I rode the bus to work, I caught the familiar deep inhale of someone smelling my hair. When I was standing in a lunch line, I felt my hair move as someone inhaled. When I was at Walmart buying groceries, someone actually touched my hair, but they were gone when I turned around. It led me to become something of a recluse, and I only left the house if it was to go to work. Over time, my hair grew out, and I decided that I would have to get another cut. I went to bed, setting my alarm so I could get up early enough to go to Master Cuts down on Bonnie. It was Saturday. I had the day off, and I had chores to do before the business of relaxation. As I slipped off to sleep, I fell into a familiar dream, a dream that had plagued me for weeks. I was sitting in the chair at Mr. Faskel's, the cape falling around me like a spider web, and the old man asking if it was too tight. I didn't say anything. I was too scared to speak. And as the scissors began to clip, I trembled in fear. I didn't dare look back at the old man. I just knew his real face would be replaced by a monstrous visage, and I would wake up panting and looking around for nothing at all. When the alarm went off, I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face and start the shower. My bare shoulders itched, and when I went to wipe it off, I noticed there was hair clinging to my sweaty hand. Not a lot, just leavings. like the leavings you find after a haircut. I ran to the bathroom and found that my hair was cut just the way I liked it. The sides were high and tight. The top was manageable but still thick, and my bangs were perfect. Everything was just as it usually was, and I felt a cold chill run through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioner. I called my landlord. I had the locks changed and reported to the police that someone had broken into my house and cut my hair. The police didn't really take it seriously. They made jokes about a midnight barber and asked if I'd left a tip under my pillow. I told them about Mr. Fasco, but when I gave them the address, they just shook their heads and walked away. They thought I was joking with them. They didn't believe a word of what I told them. And as I ran the shower, I remember sitting under the water for a very long time and just letting it run over me. The bits of hair flowing down the drain felt like a betrayal. 2 weeks later, I woke up to another fresh haircut. I called the police again, but they rolled their eyes and told me to calm down. I told them it was hard for me to calm down when someone was breaking into my house and cutting my hair. I demanded they go check on Mr. Fascal and told them right where the shop was, but they looked less than amused this time at the suggestion. I asked if they had talked to him yet, told them that he had been my barber for the last 3 years, but they just told me it hadn't been funny the first time, and it wasn't funny now. Why would it be funny? I asked, having to stop myself from grabbing one of them. Because Fascal's has never been opened. It's a prop for the city's revitalization project, like Cooley's Flowers across the street or Green Butcher beside it. It's just set dressing. It's never open. Mr. Fascal was a guy who owned a barbershop in the 20s. He's dead. There's no Fascal who cuts hair. They left, and that left me pretty rattled. Mr. Fascal isn't a ghost. I know that. I have friends who go to him. I felt him touch me. He's flesh and blood, just like I am. I'm sure of it. The fact that he eats hair is incidental. The man is real, but if he isn't Mr. Fascal, then who is he? How does he keep breaking into my house? I have windows in my room, but they're barred with pieces of broom handle. I live on the 3rd floor, for God's sake. I changed the locks again. I wedged a chair under my door, and when I finally made myself calm down enough to sleep, I hoped it would end. I woke up completely bald this time. Not buzzed, not a zero guard, but bald. Like someone had shaved my head in my sleep and took the hair. They got my eyebrows too, my 5 o'clock shadow, my thick sideburns. I was as smooth and hairless as a newborn baby. I don't know what to do. I can't call the cops. They won't believe me. I can't call my landlord. He's replaced the locks twice now. And he's getting angry about it. I can't afford to move. I can't leave my job. I'm stuck. What I did find, however, was a message on my nightstand. I'm sure the cops will say that I wrote it, but I know I didn't. There's hair on it. It's written in a heavy hand, like a kid's scribbles. It's done on the back of an ad for Fascal's Hair and Beards, and the implication was pretty obvious. Come see me when it grows back. If you don't, it makes no difference. I know where to find you.
When I was 8, I was abducted for about an hour. I know that's an odd statement, but trust me when I say, it gets weirder. When I was 8, a man abducted me right off the street. My parents and I lived in a shabby apartment about a block from my primary school. Since Mom worked days and Dad worked nights, I was responsible for getting myself to and from school since I was 6. I walked the same way home every day, and if someone was trying to snatch me, it wouldn't have been hard to learn my routine. So there I was, walking to school with my Power Rangers book bag swinging off my shoulder, thinking of nothing more pressing than the math test I hadn't studied for the night before. Suddenly, a white van rolled close enough to ruffle my hair with the side mirror of the van. Then a hand caught the handle at the top of my book bag and pulled me in. I struggled as the meaty hand lifted me into the passenger seat, but he pulled me up with little effort. He reached over and shut the door, his arm crossing right in front of my face. This would have been my opportunity to bite or kick or fight in some way before the van rolled on again. I found myself unable to react, though, frozen by the ease at which I had been lifted from the street. As we moved away from the curb, I glanced at my abductor as he sat behind the wheel. It's funny how your mind always creates a picture of a potential abductor. When the teacher talks about the strangers in school, I always picture a man in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that covers his face, a soft voice with a gentle nature. On all the TV shows I wasn't allowed to watch but did, child molesters were always these casual business types with vans full of candy and sweet smiles. This guy, however, looked nothing like the guys on TV. The man sitting next to me was large, gray, and scary looking. He looked more like the prisoners on the TV shows I watched when no one was paying attention. He had long, greasy hair that was graying in odd places, muscular arms connected to a barrel chest barely contained by his dirty sweater, and a pair of eyes that looked 1,000 miles away as he piloted the van on its course. I became terrified that I would never see my parents again, that I would never see my toys again, and that my parents wouldn't have anything to remember me by except the school picture I'd brought home last week. It's funny sometimes, the things kids worry about. "Don't worry, Mark. I'm not gonna hurt you," the guy said in a gravelly voice full of mucus. I stiffened in my seat. How do you know my name?" That was a stupid question. The man had probably been stalking me for weeks before making his move. He knew my name, he knew my parents' names, he knew my address, he knew the kids I played with at recess, and what time I took my first poop every morning. He had stalked me like a hunter stalks a deer, and now it was time to move in for the kill. "Because I am you." That took me by surprise. I had expected many things. I had thought maybe he'd say he was in love with me, to scream at me that he would kill me so I'd be scared so he could get off on my fear, maybe even that he would keep me forever, that he'd be my new dad, or I'd be his new son. I hadn't expected him to say that he was me. "What do you mean?" I asked, visibly confused. He stared straight ahead, seemingly unable to begin. I thought again about how he was probably going to hurt me and leave me in the woods somewhere after he'd killed me. That was what the killers always did on unsolved mysteries after they killed someone. I bet he had a shovel or something in the back. My 8-year-old mind could already see him carrying my limp body off into the forest to bury me in an unmarked grave. The dogs would come sniffing after me at some point, and they'd unearth a perfect little skeleton in a hole in the woods. My parents would cry and scream, just like the parents did on TV, and Robert Stack would ask the viewers to call if they had any information. It's funny, the places a kid's mind goes when he's in panic. "This is hard, kid. Now that I'm here, I don't know how to start." We sat in silence for a few more minutes before he found his words. "So, in 40 years, humanity cracks the secret to time travel." He paused again, unsure how to continue, before finally settling into a rhythm. "By the time they do, you will have spent 20 years of your mandatory 2 life sentences in prison." I turned to look at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "Prison? Why am I in prison?" He sighed, fishing a cigarette out of the cup holder, where he had several sitting loose. He pressed the lighter on the dashboard and put the cigarette in his mouth as he waited for it to pop again. "We've done some things we aren't proud of, Mark. We acted in haste, and now we have to contemplate at leisure. Let's just say that you took the easy way out one too many times, and finally, it came back to bite you. The old neighborhood claims us all eventually, Mark. You're living in a septic tank, and it's only a matter of time before you get pulled down into the shit." The lighter popped, making me jump, and he yanked it out and pressed the tip to the cigarette. He inhaled and turned back to look at me. "We don't have much time. Someone noticed me take you off the street. At least they did last time. And the cops are going to pull me over in about 10 minutes. You have to stop this from happening. You can't let the old neighborhood claim you like it always does. There are bad people there, people that will be responsible for your downfall. You have to get as far away from them as you can. You have to get away and never look back. If you stay, you'll be forever damned. Get out, Mark! Get out and live!" The cigarette jittered in his lips. He was shaking me then, yelling into my face, shaking me as the cigarette's red end swam back and forth in his mouth. I felt my head getting fuzzy as he shook me, and when the red light started flashing, I thought it might be from all the shaking. He stopped then, turning to look back at the lights, and reached into his pocket to pull out a gleaming piece of steel. It was a gun, a big gun, and when he stepped out of the car and leveled it at the policeman, they seemed afraid. They weren't afraid when they shot him, though. They yelled at me when I climbed out of the driver's door, but I didn't care. I held his hand as he lay dying, his face turning to look at me. I could see that half his cheek was missing. His sweater was turning the color of autumn leaves, and when he spoke, it was gurgly and wet. He coughed a bright spray of blood onto my shirt, and I still remember how it stood out against the bright yellow as the cops came running towards me. "Get out, Mark. Get out before it's too..." By the time they got there, he was dead. My parents arrived shortly after I got to the police station. Mom hugged me, crying, and Dad wrapped himself clumsily around me as well. It was the first time in months that I could remember seeing them together. As they folded me into their embrace, I remember thinking that everything was going to be okay. I could avoid the scary man's prophecy and prevent the terrible fate that he was trying to warn me about. How naive I was then. That night, Mom and Dad had a terrible fight. Mom wanted to leave the neighborhood. She wanted us to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, until we could find a different place. She didn't feel safe here, not in a place where people just got picked up off the street and nearly kidnapped in broad daylight. Dad wouldn't hear of it. He had lived here his whole life. This was where his work was. She was crazy. Maybe she could just get another job somewhere, but he wasn't about to throw away 10 years on the job because she was scared. As I lay in bed, I realized that everything wasn't just going to be okay. I clutched my stuffed Ninja Turtle tightly as they continued to rage at each other in the living room. The next day, Mom came to talk to me. It was decided that Mom and I would stay with my grandparents for a while. It was also decided that Dad would stay at the apartment. A little while turned into the next 10 years of my life. My parents got divorced a year after we went to stay with Grandma and Grandpa. I went to see him a few times, but Mom usually insisted that he come to us. When I did go to see him, she came with me. She still didn't trust the old neighborhood, and the few times I went back, I saw that it had gotten worse. Gangs and drugs had taken over, and Dad had become a stranger to me. When the construction company he had been with for so long closed down, he joined the element around him. Mom wouldn't tell me what he was doing, but I'm sure he was making drugs. The next time I saw him, he looked like a zombie from a horror movie. His hair was thinning, his face was gaunt, and he smelled like a truck stop toilet. He told me to stay in school and make something of myself. He told me not to end up like him, not to let people I thought were my friends drag me down into something I couldn't get back out of. Whether he knew it or not, he spoke the words that the strange man had said to me when he told me to never come back to our old neighborhood. "It's a trap, son. The only thing it can do is ruin you." When his apartment burned down a few months later, Mom didn't even take me to his funeral. I was 15 by then, just starting high school, and ready for the rest of my life. My grandparents had money, the kind of money that I now understand my mom wanted. They gave both of us the best life they could. With my grandfather's influence, I got into private school after private school. My mother made it very clear that I wasn't to squander the gifts I'd been given, and I took her at her word. By the time I was 18, I was at the top of my class and ready to enter almost any college I wanted. College was where I met Tabitha, though. Tabitha was where everything changed. I enrolled in a prestigious college, but I won't sully their reputation by naming them here. They were proud to name me amongst their alumni when I first stepped into their halls of learning. I took to my classes much the way I had taken to high school classes. I excelled, was noticed, and was praised for my hard work. I made the dean's list and was invited to join the kinds of academic circles that would ensure I had my own level of influence when the time came for my children to attend school. I was as far from that sidewalk in my old neighborhood as I had ever been. Little did I know, I was much closer than I thought. Tabitha was a year above me. She was a film major I'd met through a friend, and I knew I wanted her from the first time I saw her. My friend Jace was not what you would call centered on his studies. Jace had been accepted on a sports scholarship, and I had accepted that he was a burnout who was here to party and meet girls. Jace thought it was the height of hilarity to get me to skip out on my studies and hang out with him and his other friends, and Tabitha was one such friend. It was she who brought me about to the return of my old life. It all started because Jace was in my room, calling the person he bought drugs from. "Damn it!" he yelled, slamming the phone down and startling me from my work. He won't sell me anymore, he sulked, drawing his feet to his chest as he sat on my bed. Says my friends keep calling and coming by, and he thinks we're bringing heat around. Where am I supposed to get my Aether now? Aether was a drug that was trendy on campus at the time. I knew it was amphetamine-based, but other than that, I had little knowledge of it. I didn't take drugs. I wanted to stay sharp, and other than the knowledge I gained from Jace and his friends, I was pretty ignorant of the whole culture. I was supposed to get some for the party tonight. Now I gotta show up empty-handed. A party, I thought. Maybe Tabitha would be there. I wanted to see her again, but if Jace wasn't invited to any more parties, neither would I. I thought fast and realized that I might not be as ignorant about the culture as I thought. Maybe I did know someone. I know a place you could get some drugs, I said, almost shyly. An hour later, we pulled up in front of my Uncle Randy's house. Uncle Randy was what I had always called Dad's friend Randall for most of my life. He and Dad had been childhood friends. Uncle Randy had been the best man at my parents' wedding, and I kept in touch with him a little after Dad died. His house had once been pretty, too pretty for a bachelor, Mom would often say, but now it looked run down and kind of creepy when we pulled up. Jace looked at me as if to say this was not how he was used to buying drugs, but I climbed out and told him to follow me. Randy was on the front porch, and he looked rough. He had clearly been cooking for quite some time. Burn scars and adult acne spotted his face. His receding hairline had been scooped back until the shiny pate drew attention to the greasy ponytail that hung limply off the back of his head. He looked like every internet troll you'd ever seen memed, but his weaselly eyes were full of dull hate and a bright hunger for whatever he could get from others. He greeted me warmly, but his eyes never smiled. We bought Aether from him, and were gone without much catching up or small talk. Apparently Uncle Randy did not have time for small talk anymore. The party was a huge success. Tabitha was there, and after Jace told them all how I had saved the party, she warmed up to me considerably. I didn't need the Aether that she puffed into my mouth with every passionate kiss. I was high enough off just being that close to her. She spent most of the party with her hand wrapped around mine, her body pressed against me. We were dating after that. I wouldn't use Aether. Just getting a contact high when we kissed was enough for me. She called it Aether hopping, and delighted in pushing the potent smoke into my mouth with every kiss. We started becoming very close. As we spent more and more time together, I tried to juggle my studies with the rush of my new girlfriend. I had always been too consumed by my term papers, or the collegiate essay, to have much time for a companion. With Tabitha, though, I felt happy in her distraction and full of her presence. Eventually, we graduated from college and moved into our own apartment. She got work as a columnist for a magazine, and I started work as an architect for a firm in the city. The money was good, we were both making enough to do the things we loved, and we found ample time to spend with each other. Tabitha kept her drug use under control, and I had broken myself of what little habit I had. Tabitha was enough for me, and I hoped I was enough for her. I was so naive. We'd been together about a year when she started spiraling. She said that she wrote better when she was on Aether. She certainly wrote more, but probably not better. The magazine she wrote for began to kick the articles back, not pleased with her work. This made her more self-conscious and made her use more. As the money stopped coming in, she still seemed to find ways to get Aether. She never asked me for money, and I could always tell when she was just going day to day, trying to find her fix. In hindsight, I should have realized what was going on. She began to be gone for long periods of time, always coming home tired and irritable. She was aloof and confrontational. When I confronted her about it, she became aggressive and often combative. I never knew what to do in these cases. She was so removed from the Tabitha I had fallen in love with, and I didn't know what to do with her when she became this venom-spitting demon. Afterwards, we always made up. She said how sorry she was, and promised she'd never do it again. Then we repeated the experience a few weeks later. The night she came home with bruises was really when I lost it. We fought, a screaming match like none we'd ever had, and she stormed out of the apartment. I heard her car start up and leave the lot. I just sat in our apartment, wondering what I should do. What I did in the end was follow her. I had often worried that her drug use might send her spiraling out of control, so I had installed a program on her phone that would let me track its location. I know this sounds invasive, but I was terrified that she might get lost or hurt, and I might need to find her quickly. Aether has some severe health risks, and the thought of her having a heart attack or something, and no one being able to find her, hurt me deeply. I wish, now that I had just let her leave. I followed her to the neighborhood. I followed her to Uncle Randy's house. Her car was parked outside. As I walked up, I could already hear a low noise coming from the living room. The lights were off, the living room curtains were drawn, but they were illuminated from behind by the glow of the TV. The door was ajar, one of her purple sneakers left across the threshold. As I pushed the door open, I could hear Tabitha's heady moans and could guess what was going on. Randall was her supplier. When she couldn't pay him, she had settled up in other ways. Now she was in his living room, paying with the only currency she had left. I'd like to say that I flew into a rage, but I didn't. I'd like to say that I blacked out, but I didn't. I remember everything with crystal clarity. I opened the coat closet and took out the shotgun I knew that he had there from childhood. It was loaded, as it always was, and Uncle Randy had kept it as clean and oiled as the day he had shown it to 7-year-old me. He told me it was for bad people that might want to hurt him. He told me it wasn't a toy, and I should never point a gun at anyone I didn't want dead. A lesson that came back to bite him that day. Tabitha screamed when she saw me framed in the living room door. She had been smiling a moment before, but now all the blood had drained from her face. She looked like the corpse she would soon become. Randy turned his head, that greasy tail swinging. He looked at me in surprise, and I leveled the shotgun at the two of them, my face a cold mask of indifference. Tabitha said my name, mouthed it before her perfect chest was a spray of blood, and the buckshot turned it into a pitted landscape of gore and viscera. Randy said nothing. The first shot had opened up the top of his skull, and he died instantly. She lay atop him, tears welling in her eyes as she fought for breath. She fixed me with those eyes as if to say, well, what else was I supposed to do? I didn't have an answer for her. I just dropped the gun on the worn rug and walked out onto the front porch to wait for the cops. I wasn't there when she died. I didn't hold her in my arms and tell her how sorry I was. I just sat on the porch and listened to her gasp out her breaths until they were muffled by the sound of approaching police sirens. I was convicted of a double homicide at the age of 22. I was given 2 life sentences, and I will never see the outside world again. Except, I guess I will. I don't know how old I'll be when the program makes me an offer. The self I met was old, but everyone over 20 is old to an 8-year-old. If I had to guess, I would say he was somewhere in his 40s, but that's just a guess. He told me I would be in prison for 20 years. I guess this is a fact that's set in stone. As I sit in my cell and think about my future, I often think about what he said. Someone saw me take you off the street. At least they did last time. That leads me to believe that he experienced this when he was a child. Maybe I always go back and try to warn myself, and perhaps I always fail. What if my life is nothing but a loop of trying and dying to keep myself from coming to Randy's living room and ruining my life? How long has this loop been going on? What would happen if I closed it? Would I simply cease to exist? I lay on my single bed some nights, staring at the roaches crawling across the ceiling, and think about the people who have brought me to this point. My mother, my father, my grandparents, Jace, Tabitha, Uncle Randy, and I somehow know what must be done as they all swim by. When it's my turn to step into the past, I don't think I'll explain anything. I might just take the gun out of my pocket and shoot myself as I sit rooted in the passenger seat and see what happens next. I've got 20 years to think about it, I guess. Plenty of time to work out the finer points of my own murder. I need to tell someone about this, mostly to get it off my chest, but also because, screwed up as the situation is, it's one of the best stories I've ever heard. I attend a large university in Arizona. I won't say which, but my friends and I were sharing a bottle of Jack the other night, and we started sharing stories. Somehow, we got on the subject of spooky stories, and it appeared that several of us had a strange occurrence to talk about. Gabriel told us about a weird apartment that he and his mother had lived in when they were in West Virginia. Apparently his mother had woken up screaming one night after a dark figure had appeared over her bed. He had come in and found it melting away into nothing, and the two of them had moved out shortly thereafter.
John told us about a weird deer he'd seen on a hunting trip, and I told him about a sound I'd heard outside my parents' house in Montana throughout my childhood. One of Dad's friends, he was a zoologist or something, said it didn't sound like any animal he was familiar with. Dad jokingly asked him if it was a Bigfoot or something. He never really quite denied it. He got spooky quiet and just said he wouldn't be caught out dead in the woods, especially not after dark. We never went camping out there anymore, but we certainly never went past the property line either after dark. Passed the bottle to Samuel, and for once, he actually took a sip. Samuel, or Sam for short, had been living in the dorm since before we'd arrived at university. He was in his third year and was studying engineering as he worked towards a bachelor's degree. He had told us several stories about growing up in a small town in Mexico and how his uncle was thanks to his current status as a student. His uncle was a professor of Spanish studies and antiquities, and he had offered to help his nephew get a student visa so he could do more than drink shitty beer in the local bar and do manual labor his whole life. I opened up saying that it was weird to see Samuel drink, but I don't think you understand how strange it was. Samuel was our permanent designated driver because in the 2 years that we'd known him, I had never so much as seen him touch a bottle of alcohol, unless it was to throw it away or take it from us when we'd had enough. He took a moment to collect his thoughts before saying in a hollow voice, "I told you all I grew up in Mexico, right?" We all nodded, and he continued, "Well, I grew up in this rural little town right outside of Hermosillo. It wasn't large, maybe 8,000 people in the whole town, and most of our work came from the processing plant or from the farms that operated around the small town. My mother and I lived there with my abuelo and my abuela. My uncle was living in America and sending money back when he could. My abuelo was a horse breeder, something my family had practiced for generations, and he would work for the stockman for one of the larger ranches in the area. We weren't quite as well off as the rancher, but we were doing okay. Wasn't a bad life. It was hard, but not without its pleasures. When I was in high school, my friends and I would go to parties held at the local farms. The rancher's son, Santiago, and I had been friends since we were young, and we palled around with some of the ranch hand sons, Juan, Christopher, and Mateo. We were good friends, probably the best friends I've ever had, but one night we found something that none of us quite believed in. We had all grown up with stories about La Llorona or El Cibon, but my mother always loved to use a certain legend to scare me. La Lachuza was a witch who turned herself into some sort of owl demon after her death. She was said to roam the lands, hunting for drunks or just children out after dark. She would make noises in the night to trick you into opening your window so she could steal your eyes. She would pretend to be a baby to lure you into the woods. She would create thunderstorms and other nasty things and would come to get naughty children if they acted out. La Lachuza was used a lot in my house to get me to do things like chores or homework that I really didn't want to do. By the time I was a teenager, though, I was kind of done with my mom's scary stories about owl ladies. I was much more interested in drinking with my friends and meeting girls. I was 16 when she caught me on my way out the door. "I know where you're going off to. I beg you, do not go out there and drink with your friends." I brushed her off, saying I was of age, and if I wanted to go hang out with my friends, then I would. And if La Lachuza would happen across you and your group? I scoffed, telling her that her stories didn't scare me anymore. "That story is what killed your father," she started to say, but I cut her off. Dad had died in a drunk driving accident before I was born. He had driven off the road and hit a tree, his car erupting into a ball of flame, and that's why we had nothing to bury. But Mom had insisted that it had been La Lachuza who had driven him off the road. This had made me even scarier of the creature when I was a kid, but now it made me mad that she would use my father's death like this. I left without another word, climbing into Santiago's car as it pulled away from my house for the last time. She was standing in the road crying as we drove off. That image will be scarred into my brain until the day I die. We were out late. I couldn't tell you much about the party, just that it was in someone's barn. The beer was hot, the women were lukewarm, and the music was subpar at best. I drank too much, trying to get the fight with my mom out of my head, and by the time we called it a night, I was well and truly drunk. We climbed into Santiago's car, all of us laughing and tipsy. We started out, Santiago managing to keep it on the road as we whooped and hollered in the back seat. He was laughing along with us, turning the music up on the radio, but when he swerved suddenly, we all screamed like banshees. He hauled us back on the road, Mateo opening the window to vomit, and I leaned up as I asked him what was wrong. He looked pale, all the tipsy scared out of him as he stammered, I thought there was an old lady in the road, but when she turned, her body looked wrong. I said how weird it was to see someone so old out this late, but suddenly I yelled for him to look. Something was in the road, and if it was what he had seen before, he had been absolutely right. It was hunched over, a long cloak on its shoulders, and it looked deformed. It turned to look at the car as it barreled forward, and I could see piercing red eyes that bore into my soul. I saw it all in the space of 5 seconds, maybe, but those eyes will stay with me forever. Santiago never had a chance to do anything. He just plowed right into her, doing 55. The car suddenly stopped dead, and I came to about a minute later. I had boffed my head pretty good on the seat, but one look at Santiago told me I had gotten off lucky. He had slammed into the windshield, breaking his neck and turning his skull into a rotten gourd. The others seemed to be okay, but the car was smoking, and we climbed out as we assessed the damage. The whole front end was smashed in like we'd hit a tree or a big rock, but nothing was in the road to be hit. I remembered the old lady and moved off to check the ditches, thinking maybe we had knocked her off the road. The others just milled about, not sure what to do, and that's when it happened. The moon was full that night, or I may very well have missed it. A shadow passed over me, a thing with a wingspan like a condor, and I looked up just in time to see it drop onto my friends as they stood huddled around the car. It had landed on Juan, breaking his back and riding him to the ground. He screamed, his scream watery and miserable. He wouldn't scream for long, though. The bird dropped its head and began to feed on him, its beak plunging and diving as the other two backed away in horror. When it looked up, face dripping blood and owl eyes glaring at me, I ran. I don't know if the other two ran at the time, but I felt like a mouse who'd seen an owl. I ran, still drunk and weaving, and the houses swam up in my peripherals. I could still hear that wet, crunching sound as the creature fed, and I stumbled as my feet hit a root. I kept running, kept moving, kept showing my heels as the houses wobbled like an oil painting all around me. I just kept running, knowing that my house couldn't be far, not noticing the lack of night sounds until it was too late. When that unearthly screech split the night, I panicked and turned a corner at random. When my foot hit a pothole, I thought for sure I was going to die. My world suddenly exploded with light, and I stumbled back on my hands and butt as a bright something nearly blinded me. I turned, putting my back to those blinding lights, and saw a horror as it descended. The headlights spotlighted the owl thing, and as it swooped down on me, I figured this was the end. I closed my eyes and put my hands up across my face, preparing for the end. That's when I heard my mom yelling at the thing. She came out of the car, shouting curses and brandishing a cross on a long silver chain. The owl monster flapped its wings, changing its course and taking off again. It screeched loudly, flapping those wings angrily as it flew away. My mother helped me into the car then, but I must have passed out, because I woke up in my bed the next morning. I would have believed it was a dream if Mom hadn't told me all about it as we sat at the breakfast table. She had made food, and there was a pot of coffee there as well. As I ate, she told me all of it. How the creature had killed my dad one night as he drove home drunk. How Santiago and Juan had been found dead that morning. How my other friends had never arrived home that night. She spelled it out for me and told me how lucky I was to be alive. She said I had been given a chance and that it was up to me to figure out how to use it. She wasn't happy with my answer after I'd thought about it for a few days, but I think she understood. I still went to those parties, but I never drank again. Instead, I helped people get home safely. I never saw that creature again, but there were nights that I imagined I could feel its hateful stare. I was taking its prey from it, stealing its food, and it never quite forgave me for that. Not a day goes by that I don't think about that night and my friends who died. We sat there, drinking as we listened to his story, a cold chill flowing through us as we took it all in. I'd say this was the end, but that wouldn't do him or his story justice. 3 weeks ago, Samuel came to me in tears and told me that his mother was going to die. I sat him down. He was shaking like a leaf, and asked him how he could possibly know that. Before that, I hadn't seen him in class in a few days, and he looked tired and rattled. I dreamed I was in my mother's house, the one she has on my grandparents' property, and I heard her crying. I walked into the living room, and she was sitting at the kitchen table. I walked up behind her, putting a hand on her shoulder, and asked her what was wrong. She grabbed my arm, and her hand had become a claw. Her head turned around, and she screeched at me through that owl beak. Her face had become that of the owl witch, and just before I woke up, she screamed my mother's name. I asked him what that meant, and he said, "Some people say that seeing her in a dream means that someone you love will die. She screamed my mother's name. I can't ignore that." 3 days later, he told me he was returning home for his mother's funeral. They found her in her room. She'd had a heart attack. I need to go home and say goodbye. Will you watch my plants while I'm away? I told him I would, but I think he knew he wasn't coming back. A week ago, I asked his uncle if there was any news. His uncle only sighed and told me that his nephew was missing. My mother tells me that he went to the house he and his mother had shared. No one has seen him since. We don't know where he is, but if you're still watering his plants, I'll pick them up this afternoon. Hopefully, I can give them to him when he comes back. I don't know what became of Sam, but I pray that the owl witch, Lachuza, did not get him.